Creative people are the trusted communicators of our society, a society that is ridden with more fear, loneliness, and anxiety than ever.
We recognize that creative people and those championing their work should be honored for who they are and treated with care as they devote their lives to articulating the human experience.
My name is Samantha Jervey.
My name is Emily Falvey.
Together, we're the co-founders and co-host of Mind Over Melody, a podcast focused on wellness for artists, songwriters, and music industry professionals.
We pray our conversations can be a safe place for you to rest, grow, contemplate, and be reminded that your wellness matters first and foremost, and ultimately leads to the kind of creativity that sustains and abounds.
Thank you for listening to Season 1 of Mind Over Melody. We'd like to give a special thank you to our sponsors for this season, Truist and Porter's Call, and to our editor, Cooper Carr. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or a qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health issue. If you are experiencing a crisis or need immediate help, please contact a local mental health service or emergency services. Other resources are available on our website at mindovermelody.com.
Okay, guys, welcome to Mind Over Melody. This is Sam speaking. Here with Emily Falvey, my co-host, and our amazing special guest today, Mary Reames Rinehart. In a few minutes, Emily's going to share a bit more just about Mary and her journey before we kind of lead into questions about the integration of, medication management amongst creatives and the creative community. There's a lot of stigma around this topic, especially as it pertains to, does it disrupt creativity? Does it stand in the way? So really, we just want to open the floor to an honest dialogue and, lean on Mary's expertise in this field. And so, Emily, I'll kick it over to you to share a bit more about Mary.
Yes, okay. Mary Reames Rinehart attended the Medical University of South Carolina and has been a board-certified family nurse practitioner since 2013. After moving to Nashville 6 years ago, she was fortunate to attend Vanderbilt University and add a secondary specialization as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. Utilizing both trauma-informed therapeutic and medical frameworks, her goal is to take an integrative and holistic approach that supports individuals, children, adolescents, and families. Because every person has a unique story and perspective, she values the mantra of whole person care, all stories welcome. I love that. Mary's husband is a touring artist, and they have been married for 21 years. They have personally experienced the highest highs, lowest lows, and everything in between the journey of artists and their families. They have 3 little boys and a lot of gratitude for their unique story. Mary loves working with individuals from all walks of life to provide support in whatever way feels authentic to them. She holds the belief that every person is beautifully unique and working to find a collaborative plan that should reflect this philosophy. Her approach often involves several key steps: discussing personal complexities, developing individualized or family-oriented plans, identifying needs and resources, and providing therapeutic interventions for children and caregivers. Mary believes the individuals and families she works with deserve to have the comprehensive therapeutic, pharmacologic, or supplemental options that prioritize what they find most supportive and important. What an amazing bio.
Yeah, truly.
It's hard to really cast what you're trying to do to people, and so thanks for reading all that.
Well, I love it, and I really feel like your mission really aligns with what we're trying to do with this podcast, and so it's really a joy to get to have you here. First, I'd love to hear more about where you're from, what your story is, how you got to Nashville, and then your trajectory for becoming an FNP and what prompted you to add your specialty.
Yeah, it's funny. The thing that sticks out the most when I hear the bio read back is that my husband and I have been married for 21 years. So, and it makes me feel old mostly, but it's also a point, I'm proud of it. But we got married, we both went to college in South Carolina, grew up there, and got married when we were 20. And we were naive enough to believe that music would work out. So, spent the first 5 years, we joke, I was their first booking agent, so to speak, in college, which meant I was calling coffee houses and different places to play and pretending that I was older than I was. And, we came up with a name called City Lights Production so I could sound like a professional. So did that for a while until we got married and actually needed to like pay a few bills.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I went just got like a local job while he was on the road. And so we did that for 5 years. Honestly, we were really blessed during that time. I worked in marketing and, was able to take the brunt of sort of the expenses of living. And then about 5 years into our marriage, I really started thinking about what do I want to do? And I had traveled overseas with the medical team and just fell in love with it. And I happened to come from a medical family, so it wasn't like a stretch for me. So we moved to Charleston and I went to medical university and became a family nurse practitioner because I really wanted to work with underserved populations. And I think if I hadn't like been married and had family here, I would have maybe considered going overseas. But honestly, moving down there, it made me realize like people are in need like in your backyard. So
Yeah.
worked in community health for a long time, and we were in Charleston about 10 years. So fast forward to I guess like 2000, I don't know, 17. We started talking about moving to Nashville because it just we had had a child and two kids by that point. We didn't have kids until we had been married for like 13 years, but that really changed what touring was like. And so those, I mean, as you know, those days of rehearsal and travel days and stuff like that are out of Nashville just add extra time that you're kind of away. So that's what kind of prompted us to decide, like, I think it's time to move to Nashville. So we did in 2018. And once we got here, after we got kind of our kids settled through the transition and everything, I was just honestly, a friend asked me a great question, which was, when were you most fulfilled in your job? And I realized it was really when I was working with women or families who were in crisis or in life transition. Those were my favorite moments. So decided to go back to Vanderbilt for psychiatry and mental health as a nurse practitioner. So added that, and then really, since I work with Porter's Call, it kind of made sense. A lot of I opened my own practice since I was a little bit older and had been a nurse practitioner for well over 10 years. Felt like I could kind of ease into creating a practice that really reflected what I ultimately wanted to do and gave me the margin to be a little autonomous with having a husband that does travel and then having three kids now. So it's been great. Most of the folks that I work with are from the artist community or their families. But I have some that are not. Obviously, I can see anybody. So I've loved it. It's been a great experience, and I really do sort of take a holistic approach. I think when people think of medical providers, they immediately think of medication, and for me, yeah, that's always an option. But really, it's about determining what areas a person or a family needs support in. Is that from a therapy standpoint? Or would medication be beneficial? Or I also want to hear when people are averse to medication and have had bad experiences in the medical community. So that is real.
Yeah.
People having been hospitalized or having providers where they didn't feel seen or heard. So I wanted it to be a very different experience for folks. So I really try to kind of look at what does this individual or family want or need, and how can we support and help them, whether it's supplemental treatment, therapeutic treatment, medication, or all of it. So
That's so beautiful. I feel like the systems perspective, it's definitely how I think both our brains work, Emily. Definitely passionate about that personally. And I think looking at the individual in the context of everything that's going on, down to like, hey, tell me about your history of
yeah,
what are your preconceived notions about medication? What has your experience been? Kind of recognizing what will stand in the way as your pitfalls is so
yes,
important. And just, finding the community to support them outside of that as well, because that's one aspect of the broader mental health and well-being of the individual.
yeah,
So I really, really appreciate that. And I think what I hear as a theme too is like your attunement and your compassion for your practice, for your clients. And then given all your experiences, I mean, as a spouse, and someone who has served as a booking agent, like was
That's true
doing the
though,
work.
booking agent. A little kid in a dorm room, but busting
Totally.
tail for sure.
It counts to
Totally.
us.
It
Chasing a
does.
dream.
It does. I mean, that's like the origin story of so many people who wind up
Yeah,
on the industry side too. So I love it. The hustle.
totally.
But you mentioned Porter's Call, which I
Mhm.
know before we started recording today, we were all talking about just kind of that being a special organization here in Tennessee, based in Franklin, that has had a great impact on, I think, all of us, and we share involvement in. And so, one, we're very grateful for your involvement in Porter's Call through, you know, the board and just your daily championing of creatives in that capacity, but as well as your practice. But I'd love to hear, especially given that you do work with many creatives and their family systems,
Mhm.
what do you think is the greatest mental health need right now in the creative community?
Yeah, I mean, it can vary obviously so much. I think we're fortunate in Nashville. I do think there are safe places to go. Um, and I think, and this goes beyond creatives, I do think the idea of mental health is being destigmatized, honestly, over the past 10 years. I remember growing up, I mean, bless my parents' hearts, they would have never gone to therapy. It was just very
No.
taboo. And I think it feels like, and I'm probably biased because I'm in this community, it feels like if you're not in therapy, what are you doing? But I
Yep.
know, yeah, but I do think overall things are being destigmatized. I think on the medical side, there's understandably a lot of distrust. I think, and therefore that makes space for a lot of misinformation out there in terms of what works, what doesn't, what's helpful. So I think just as a consumer, all of us, whether creatives or not, it's hard to muddle through all the information that's coming at you in general in a day, especially with social media, and then knowing
Yeah.
what's good, solid, research-based, evidence-based information. Um, because I hate when people, spend a lot of time and money on things that may or may not be helpful to them. So, I see that as one kind of obstacle for people in general. For creatives, I think for families in particular, I think figuring out what each individual needs and how to organize your life in a way that's manageable. The truth is, you're not always going to have balance in life. Sometimes career is going to be um, even like a greater priority than time at home. But then being able to identify um, what allows you to keep pursuing your passion in the long run, I think. Bear and I were talking not that long ago, and I kind of asked him, I very much respect, again, I don't consider myself a creative, so I respect their authentic perspective. And just asked him, like, what would you tell a young artist right now? And his response, I thought, was really interesting. He was like, I would tell them it's really about the long game and looking at your career as if you're going to be doing it in 20 years from now instead of what young people in general do this in creatives, it's like we're really just thinking about the next big thing and hoping that's in the next, you know, 6 months or a year, and living our life only for that thing. Whereas what you really want is to be able to be doing it again, like I said, in 20 years from now. So I do think that is a wise perspective, and I do think having that perspective kind of changes how you treat yourself and your body and that kind of stuff. So, anyways, I kind of see a blend of those things. I work with a lot of moms and kids, a lot of spouses who are just managing the challenges of having kiddos at home with a traveling spouse. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I have one family I recently worked with that, I mean, like medication support would be inappropriate, honestly. We did a lot of play-based interventions and just family organizational type stuff to help them get in a groove that was more manageable.
I love it.
Great.
It really is so beautiful just to see the work that you're doing. And like Sam said, the attunement you have of knowing, okay, I know that for this specific person, this is not the right approach. So I'm going to take
Yeah.
the skills that I have from the, the medical practice that you have, but also just know I'm going to treat you as a human first. I think
Totally.
that's really extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's sad that is seemingly like, or has been in the past, a unique perspective, because really that's how it should be. And that's why
Yeah.
in general I love the nursing profession, as it really was born out of a desire to care for the community. Um, so anyways,
I think that's so awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. You touched on your talking to Bear about the long game, and I love that approach. I think I needed to hear that for my own career as a songwriter. So thank you for that nugget of wisdom. If you feel comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear more about your personal experience as the partner of a creative person and how y'all contend with work-life balance, how you contend with raising a family, how you manage the emotional moments. I know we've talked about the high highs and the low lows already. I think that it can be kind of a wild and atypical ride. So I'd love to hear about your personal experience.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, like I said, we've been married since we were 19, and I'm 42, which feels so weird to admit, but I feel like I'm still,
That's
early
huge,
Such a
30s.
by the
youthful
way.
glow.
Thank you.
That is huge. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm, being married young, I mean, gosh, you are so passionate, and we joke that you almost have to be dumb enough or naive enough to think that this crazy journey is going to work out. But both in being married a long time and in being anybody in the artist community or musician or whatever. So that innocence, like we can look back and just like kind of laugh at it and be grateful for it, because you wouldn't go through, you wouldn't ride around in a dingy, crappy van, staying up till 4 in the morning just to get up at 8 in the morning to get to the next spot if you didn't have that sort of youthful naivete. So, but then beyond that, I think life, just in a long-term relationship, it's ever evolving. I do think when we were in our late 20s, when our life had more financial stability, and maybe for Bear a little bit more notoriety, that's when sort of those deep emotional needs and challenges start to come up. And for us, we've been married about 10 years, and that's when you're really starting to have friction around your own woundedness, whatever that might be. I think something that Al with Porter's Call I've heard say before is just the human heart was not meant to be adored. And I think there's obviously a lot of wisdom in that. And anybody, whether you're the CEO of a corporation or just with job pressures in general, I think having notoriety, having responsibility really brings up all your inner identity, maybe issues. So we went through a really dark season of clumsily muddling through that time. And luckily, that's really when we needed to press in to support ourselves from a therapeutic standpoint and have people tell us, like, you're going to make it through this if you do the work. If you don't do the work, then that's going to be dicey. And we were. And now I can say, looking back, like, for as painful as that time period was, I am so grateful. Like, it's so much a part of our story. I'm not, I don't necessarily want to relive it, but it's just like part of our tapestry. And I would say, as I've gotten older, I really do see life. I mean, at this age, you're old enough to realize, like, life isn't always rainbows and cupcakes. You've lived enough, and you've heard enough, you've hurt people enough to realize, like, hopefully at the end of your life, it is a beautiful tapestry. Um, of all the different experiences. So I don't know, that makes me sound a little bit like I'm getting into that second half of my life. And I do think that's how we approach our relationship. At this point, I feel like we're in an amazing place and we've been blessed, like I said, with our three little boys who are 9, 7, and 4. And so it's different things that are challenging. It is managing um, their schedules. And so I would say the most challenging thing right now for Bear is missing their sports games, honestly, and figuring out how we honestly over the past year, I think their touring has changed a lot in order to be home during the week some to minimize missing that. And that there's a cost to that. They used to tour, kind of go out, let's just knock it out in 3 months and like never come home because it's more honestly more cost effective. But now with everyone in the band in particular having kids, wanting to be there for them. So that's a long-winded way of saying it. Just like it evolves every couple of years, and you have to kind of reorganize and change. One thing that we implemented that has made a huge difference, and we did it after not doing it for so many years and tripping up for all that long time, is we take a weekend away in like around January every year to just kind of reevaluate the landscape. And I hate to say create goals because that feels like a big to-do list, but really just see what are the themes that we want to keep pursuing? What do we want to let go of? How do we want to shepherd our kids? And really just kind of get on the same page and take that time away. And I actually, we're good friends with Drew and Ellie Holcomb, who are amazing. I think they do the same thing. I think I've heard Drew say it's their State of the Union weekend.
I love it.
Yeah, totally. I think that's critical, and I wish we had started it earlier in life. But it is what it is. So, but we've done it probably for the past 6 or 7 years, and it really helps us get on the same page and know where we're going over the next year.
Yeah.
That's so great.
I love that ritual. Like, I think rituals are so essential, to coupleship. When I've sat with couples in the counseling room, it's like, okay, it doesn't matter what they're doing over here or they're doing, like, what is working for you and your family system right now. And it sounds like through a lot of trial and error and just walking through the fire together, that you guys really have discerned and weighed like what's working and what's not. And I love that you revisit that every year. Also, as a new wife and a soon-to-be mom, expecting mom, like I just love hearing your perspective. Thank you. Thanks. But yeah, I mean, something came to mind. So many good things. Like as you were talking, I'm like, yes. Like you guys are unique in that you did get together when you were so young, right? And I think it was a local executive that I heard say this, that when you get married really young, it's like building a startup. There's so much like trial and error and it's messy and you're going bankrupt and you're like, whatever. But when you get together when you're older, it's mergers and acquisitions, right? And so
that's such a great way to put it. Yeah.
I loved that
I would never
perspective.
dare say one is easier than the other because I have friends who've gotten married after they have careers and stuff like that going, and that's tricky too. But I love that sort of metaphor. I think that's really true.
Yeah, because it's both and, right? Like it's like I think you're spot on. I wouldn't say either is super easy. There's pros and cons to both. Like maybe you did the work in your 20s and your prefrontal cortex has fully developed by the age of 27, 28, which I was thinking as you were talking, like, that 10 years into the marriage would have been right around that like developmental milestone of, okay, I now have a good grasp on who I am, but who the heck are you and why did I choose you in this marriage?
Right.
So, and then if you do that work, and let's say you are the mergers and acquisitions, like older dating, then you've done the work and you're like, well, wait a minute, this is not what I'm willing to put up with. Or maybe
Yeah.
all the wounds that you've assessed are in front of you and they're more prevalent. And so they're more prominent at the beginning of your relationship, which presents a whole different set of challenges versus that like naivety. So I really
Yeah, you're
appreciate.
probably more, totally. You're probably more, if you're older, like aware of the risks.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're young, like I said, you're just naive.
Yeah.
But when you're older, like there's some inherent risk involved with aligning with any human being. We're just messy people.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah.
For
I relate
sure.
deeply to that. I'm risk averse, so I've been sitting in my corner like I go on dates and I'm like, thanks, but no thanks. So Lord fix my heart on that front. But
Right. Like it's like too much self-awareness is also can be a double-edged sword. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Well, we're kind of going to pivot just back to the
Okay.
practice and the topic of medication and creativity. But thank you so much
Hmm.
for vulnerably sharing about, opening up about the
Yeah.
marriage. Um, but I'm curious from your perspective, what do you feel are some of the most common misconceptions that exist about SSRIs or just medication and creativity in general?
Totally. It's interesting being in this lane now over the past couple of years and realize like I think because Bear, for example, was always used to, all our friends in Charleston were medical, I'm medical, so we're just like chitty chatting about medication stuff all the time. So he kind of was used to it. It was new to me to realize like people that, you know, medication or any kind of medical intervention, the fear around how will this affect my creativity. And so I've had to really, like, one, I really do appreciate that perspective because it's your livelihood. Besides it being your livelihood, it's your passion. One thing that I tell patients with medication, I've probably said it already, is like it's meant for support. It is not meant to change who you are. So if it doesn't enhance who you are, then it's not right for you. Um, my thought is when somebody, and starting a new medication or doing any kind of medical intervention really should be seen as a journey. We don't have magic bullets that make the bad things go away and the good things better. So I do encourage my patients to see it as sort of the relationship with me if I'm going to be their provider or prescriber as long term. And I need feedback to know how we can pivot and adjust and change things. Um, so my biggest thing is once we get to a good spot in whatever our treatment is, I want you to feel more like yourself, not less like yourself. Um, and for let's take depression, for example. Beautiful music comes out of being in a really dark place. And um, a lot of artists do have that not all of them, but some of them have that underlying melancholy that allows them to speak to kind of the human experience. I would say my husband is very much like that. Um, I'm not trying to take away that, but I hope in a way that serves you and is supportive to you that the clouds can part a little bit so that you can both hold space for those deep, sort of soulful groanings and be able to thrive wherever that intersection is. We have other constellation of symptoms that are just risky. Let's take mania, for example. You
Yeah.
know, a popular figure, I would say, in culture is like Kanye West, which I don't know Kanye. I'm just saying he might have some manic episodes, right? And like I'm sure like creativity is incredible there, but also there's some risk there too. You know, I don't think people's desire is to completely wreck their lives um, for their art to a degree. I don't know. So there's a balance there, and it's different for every person. But I think the point being is I think support can be provided where support is needed. And if you've ever had the experience of feeling like my creativity was impacted by this thing, like bring that into the room and let's talk about it. We're not trying to go back there, you know. We're trying to get you to a place where you feel like your creativity flourishes, and you're flourishing as well. So I hope that like kind
Yeah.
of sort of demystifies some of that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Quick
Not
side
to throw
question.
Kanye under the bus. Bless his
What,
heart. Come sing it, Kanye, if you want
Kanye, if you're
to.
listening,
If you're listening, we're here for you. I'm sorry if you lose followers over that statement, but
uh, yeah, it's been pretty public, so I think
right, yeah.
on the topic of like, like manic episodes, right? Because I do feel like there are many high profile figures like a Kanye who where bipolar is prevalent in the creative community.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and then you've got substance abuse and use with that as well, oftentimes. Do you create safety plans with your clients? Like, when you sit down, is that a component of, okay, when you start to notice the signs and symptoms again, what do we do? How do we bring, because I know there's often a big resistance in those spaces of you aren't
Hmm.
yourself, the illness has taken over in that regard. And so you're not able to cognitively make choices that are going to honor your family, yourself. And so I'm just curious, how do you kind of prep for those moments?
Yeah. Well, and I think you can appreciate too, I think inherent to mental health is suicidality as well.
Yeah,
You know,
yes,
so we are dealing with folks when they're in dark places, you know.
yeah,
So, in terms of safety, I do think building that relationship over time where there's trust. And to be honest, like some people will come into my office and they're just, I'm not asking them to change their lifestyle, but even if I was, they're not ready. And that's okay,
yeah,
you know. It's just, providing education where education is desired and exploring the things that are supporting them. So we talk a lot about, okay, on your worst day, where can you go? Who can you reach out to? Is it a medical provider? Is it a friend? Looking for, and I do think over time, as a family or an individual starts to trust the relationship that they're in with you as their provider, therapist, or whatever, then you can, they're more open. You're more open to talk about what's a good plan for you. How can we protect you in the ways that you need to be protected? How can we utilize resources, even if those are just close relationships? How can we, how once the opportunity is given to me to kind of educate about sort of what I see as areas of risk or, symptoms that may be indicative that something is starting to brew. I mean, I do deal with folks who have psychotic disorders as well. So looking out for what's changing and how can we be on the front end of it and prevent or navigate through that time. I think it all, at the end of the day, comes down to relationship and then assessing what other places of support that they have in their life. And so I think inherent to that is creating safety in terms of identification. I always make sure um, patients do have a plan for that worst day of, like I said, who they'll call, who are just local resources that they can reach out, where are reputable places to go. I worked in one of our psychiatric hospitals in the adolescent unit. So, um, those are patients who are acutely ill. So we're kind of getting them stable enough to go back to an intensive outpatient program or a partial hospitalization. Um, so yeah, sometimes I think we function as um, sort of a quarterback of resources, knowing what might be helpful in certain seasons or in the moment for somebody we're seeing.
yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Whew. I can't imagine your experience working in that unit and just seeing
Oh,
people and
it's interesting because it was with teenagers and I loved it. Loved
Yeah.
it. So
yeah,
I actually miss this guy. So I love working with teenagers in the outpatient setting too. But it's complicated because then it's like, families are complicated. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That,
What a beautiful heart,
yeah.
you know. I feel
It's
like
when you know
with the
it's your
hormonal,
calling. Yeah.
yeah, right. I think between the hormonal surge, between all of the
yeah.
life and adjusting to being in your body, it's being a teenager is already hard
Oh
enough,
Yeah.
God,
and then
it's hard.
to
And
not feel
there's
safe in that body is
totally.
hard too.
Yeah, and there it is. I mean, the really beautiful thing of being in mental health is you get to see human resilience too. I mean, especially
Yeah,
with teenagers who have experienced tragedy, abuse, like whatever, all the things that aren't supposed to happen to kids in general, they've experienced. And just to be surviving one is incredible. And then in cases where I remember having a few teams. I was like, once they can get out of their family system that is chaos, they will thrive. They're going to be okay.
Yeah.
yep,
Um, so yeah, you get to see some of that beautiful stuff too.
yeah, love it. What a great perspective. I am such a fierce advocate for medication and for all that you do. I've had my own journey with Lexapro and with coming on and coming
Yep.
off. I feel like as a creative person, I have had my own. I love what you said about the melancholy that can
Uh-huh.
exist with creative people.
Yeah.
My mom used to always call it the artist temperament when I was
Yeah.
growing up. I always had such big feelings and so much to say, and always like this thread of even when I'm happy, there's always like this tinge of like, but I can find the humanity and the
Totally.
interesting kind of darker side of this. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
I'd say I'm an optimist, but I relate to that deeply.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know what are some of your favorite coping skills and self care practices to prescribe to creatives outside of medication to help regulate their nervous system amidst all of the melancholy and the anxiety or mania or depression that can exist.
Totally. Honestly, the first thing that I think is so important, again, for creatives and human beings in general, is connection. And I think having connection outside of the artist space,
Amen.
or industry
Yes.
space, having folk, and that's hard. Some people just don't have that. And that's sort of the plan is to develop that or figure out a way how to get that. And for some people who just don't have it in life, maybe it's group work, or maybe it's um yeah, therapeutic work with other people. But I think having a space where people aren't employed by you, where people love you and love what you do, but aren't beholden to you and don't don't have a transactional relationship with you and want to see you just as an individual person, human being thrive. People are super blessed if that's a family member, a sibling, but more often than not, it's a friend, it's an old friend who's known them since they were little or whatever it might be. Just having that connection where sure, if you want to share the great things that are going on with your career or life, that's great, but also they don't need that. So connection is my number one thing. And that can be hard, especially when there is success, because you invariably do have a lot of people around you whose maybe their career or their life is impacted by what you bring to the table. So
Yes.
that can be tricky in all kinds of different um, seasons of being somebody in this industry. And when you're young and you're full on in the grind and you're gonna figure out how to make this career work no matter what, then you invariably want to be surrounded by people who are like-minded and are in that grind too. So
Hmm.
just having a connected space of respite, I think, is hugely important. And then, it's the stuff that is hard for all of us. I do think moving your body, I do think caring for your body does make a difference. And I probably appreciate that more now that I'm in my 40s. And for me personally, I can say even with alcohol, like if I drink heavily, I feel terrible for a couple of days. And maybe it's just because I'm old. But I guess I have the benefit of noticing that more just because I can't not notice it. but I would say even as we're young, like the more we can take care of our bodies in a reasonable manner, exercise has direct impacts on our brain. So, I mean, that's huge. But I
Mhm.
also recognize that's also really hard. It is kind of another thing on our plate to manage. So, there's, just finding something that you enjoy in that lane, whether it's just being outside, hiking, whatever, is huge. And I would say Bear and I have this conversation all the time because being on the road is very hard in terms of,
Absolutely.
you know, it's not really the natural circadian cycle. Obviously, you're going to
Mhm.
bed late and like waking up late, and you probably don't have a lot of sunlight. And then you're in a, if you're lucky, you're touring relatively comfortably, but if you're still grinding, you're in that crappy van that we lived in for a long
Yeah.
time and probably at a venue that's like not in the nicest area of town. So it's
Mm-hmm.
those challenges, but so it's really hard. But getting the people around you who are kind of not only in charge of your career, but should be in charge of helping facilitate your well-being is really critical. So, you know, the Bear one time had their manager, and again, this is after being in a privileged spot with touring, but had their manager kind of find a local gym and set up the runner or the Uber to physically take him there every day just so he could move his body. So, you know, and I do enjoy that part of my job of like helping figure out some of the logistics of life. Like, how do we, this thing is not a medication thing. This is not necessarily a therapeutic thing, but this is about like, hey, this person is involved in your camp, and maybe this can be a responsibility that they share in helping you.
Mhm.
So that's kind of my connection and taking care of your body are probably the two main things.
Yeah,
Those are good ones and always important to be reminded of.
for sure. I just really appreciate your perspective on your practice as well, because you'd mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but kind of how the medical model has evolved over the past few years and how that's contributed to, I think, the skepticism and mistrust, maybe the hesitancy for people to seek help and support. And it's kind of like this tension because you're so right. Mental health has and well-being has been talked about more than ever in today's world, and
Uh-huh.
it's honestly being shoved down our throats sometimes on TikTok and
Hmm.
Instagram Reels. We have so
Right.
much information, and yet, there is a real hesitation to pursue help because it is a really like that power imbalance that can be prevalent in
Yes.
the provider and client relationship. And so
Hmm.
I think the focus you place on relationship and you use the word trust, I really like respect that and honor that, and even not going immediately to what's the quickest and easiest fix, but
Hmm.
coming back to that thread of longevity, right? Like, what's actually going to help change your life for the better if you start implementing this today? And yes, that might be medication management, that might be
Hmm.
an SSRI or something else to
Hmm.
help with suicidality that is
Hmm.
actively,
Right.
impeding your ability to function on a daily basis. And what we put in our body has an impact on those thoughts and feelings and our gut microbiome, all those things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thanks for sharing that, because I do think that's so essential.
Yeah. And I think too, oftentimes when, probably once a day, I'll have a person that comes in who just their system is so understandably dysregulated, whether it's from trauma or recent or past or whatever, anxiety, whatever. And long term, what I think will provide them a greater sense of freedom is therapy. And they do need to engage in
Mm,
that. Because sometimes people are so, as I'm sure you see in your practice, so dysregulated that they really don't have the emotional mental capacity
yeah.
to do good work in therapy. So sometimes it's just, hey, let's get your body a little better organized and so that you can engage and do the therapeutic work. So it's really letting you do good work in therapy. And hopefully, as you do that, maybe later on we can kind of wean down. Maybe you've got gained some new coping skills. Maybe we've rewired some connections in the brain and you can just move forward and maybe you won't need that medication support, or maybe you do. But again, it's more of a journey with that rather than an end point.
For sure.
I love
For
it.
sure. Yeah. Stabilization is like fundamental, I think, to
Yeah, totally.
before you take those steps. And a question that came to mind as a response to that, I'd just be curious to hear, when do you think is the right time to consider therapy and or medication for an individual?
Yeah. Um, Gosh, that's kind of a tricky question. I mean, I always say, and I think this is true, I think
Yeah.
everybody could benefit from therapy to a degree.
Yeah.
Um, so if you're seeing a good therapist or provider, they should help you identify like where do we need to go? What are some goals? Um,
Yeah.
some people who are in a great place, who maybe aren't dealing with some trauma from the past, all that kind of stuff, maybe it is more of therapy with a bit of a coaching edge and just life support. I would say, um, like I said, I had a family not too long ago who just the kids and their dynamics had gotten just chaotic. They have a good marriage relationship, careers going well, but their kids are just at a tricky age. So they just need, and we only did like maybe 3 sessions of just kind of tidying things up. There was no need for medication support. It's just help. So, if you're
Yeah.
that overwhelmed mom or stressed out mom, um, sometimes just having an objective person to help you plan is great. Of course, we have folks that are just completely overwhelmed. I had a patient yesterday who just was has been in a time period where that sense of overwhelm, that sense of guilt, that sense of I'm not enough has now started to impact her relationships, her work, all that kind of stuff. So, it's time. It's time for her to come in. And for that person, medication support and therapeutic work is most appropriate right now, if that's something that she's interested in. So, I mean, I think if you're thinking about it, it's, you know, go to somebody who's reputable, somebody that ask questions. Is there ever a bad time for therapy? I think is maybe a question that underlines it. I, the person that you're seeing should be professional enough to know. Um, Trauma work, for example, you can't just dive headfirst into no matter what. You do need to have some support and stability in life because it can be destabilizing.
Yeah.
But your provider should be the person who knows that and can maybe the therapy work during that season is building resources. Maybe it's med management, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I feel like if you're noticing a need, then reach out to somebody good. And somebody shouldn't just keep you on their docket uh, forever for no reason. So you can
Yes,
like,
ma'am.
I remember I got to a point with my therapist. I was like, "Hey, do you feel like there's more work to be done here?" There were a few times she was like, "Absolutely." She'd come next week, and then as we got towards the end, I was like, I kind of feel like I'm in a good spot. What do you think? She's like, I agree. She's like, you know where I am, and you can reach out. Like,
Yeah.
this might be a good time to pause the work that we're doing and kind of live in some of the gains that you've experienced. So,
I
I
love
love that.
that. Live in
Yeah.
some of the gains. So good.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
you got to take breaks from therapy sometimes, for sure.
Totally.
I love it. Well, I feel like we're maybe starting to wrap up a little bit. I think we have a couple more questions. I am just curious from my own perspective as the creative of the group. Why do you think creatives gravitate towards chaos? I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. There's this Julia Michaels lyric I love that says, "Sometimes I think I kill relationships for art." And I think that at times we creative people can sabotage our own lives, like we talked about with Kanye and all the things. So how do you think that that chaos can be mitigated without sacrificing artistic integrity? Where is the line between being, you know, keeping that thread of melancholy like we talked about, but at the same time being able to manage those feelings of not enoughness or the anxiety of the longevity of this career and how strenuous it can be at times? I'd just be
Mhm.
curious to know how to manage that chaos.
Totally. It's like it's artist's greatest strength, right? I see it more as there, it seems like there, you guys and artists are folks that are deeply in tune, again, with that human experience.
Mhm.
The full kaleidoscope of what that is like. And most of the artists I know or creatives, whether it's art, visual art or music or acting, ultimately you're storytellers. You're trying to um, impart your perspective of the human experience to somebody else and kind of sit in that together and enjoy it and look at it and be curious about it. So that curiosity is just it's makes obviously it's just a beautiful mind. And that means you're invariably swimming in deep waters a lot of
Mhm.
times.
Yeah.
You're not just floating on the surface, you're diving down, you're taking a look, and you're trying to communicate it to somebody else who maybe hasn't taken that dive yet. So, I mean, I do think it puts you at risk, right, for
Mhm.
um, heartache and pain, and great joy as well too. But there's a courage of being willing to go there and not ignore the hard things of living on this planet. So sometimes there's a toll that takes. I think so.
Yeah.
I think folks, especially who kind of find that melancholy. I mean, you have to take breaks from that sometimes. I think
Yeah.
I don't think you can live in that space all the time.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I do, I don't know that I see artists as living, I mean, sometimes living in chaos, but I think it's more just that voracious curiosity. Oh, and what I was going to say earlier, most of the artists that I've come in contact with through just being adjacent to one for several decades now are not driven by money, are not driven by fame or notoriety. I mean, those things can creep in because we all, as human beings, compare ourselves, and compare successes. Um, but most of them are driven by that soulful desire to communicate what they see as painful or beautiful in the world. So I think preserving that and hanging on to that and enjoying that process, can be one of the major themes or goals of having to traverse through the part that's like the accolades and awards and hits or whatever it is. Um,
Yeah.
but holding on to like the real reason behind all of it, that reason when you were a teenager or a kid or college student that led you in that direction in the first place. Um, Hopefully can be a practice that is uplifting or supportive or whatever.
Good. Yeah. Begin with the end in mind, start to
Yeah,
think about, constantly be reminded of that. I think the inner child that started to love music or was a big fan of songs, and that's what caused them to move to a music market and
right.
pursue this career. I think
Yeah,
that's really beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Holding on to what roots you and where you can
yeah,
come back. Like I almost heard you
yeah,
say, knowing the cues up against those roots, knowing when you've stepped outside of your window of tolerance and
yeah,
who or what can bring you back in.
yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely a dance.
yeah. And I do wonder for all of it, whatever work that we're in, um,
Yeah.
asking the question of if I never get rich, get famous, or get a hit, or whatever those external markers of quote unquote success is, if I never got those, would I still want to be doing it?
Mm.
You know,
That's great.
do I love it enough to get through the what if or the hard or whatever it might be? And to be able to say, yes, I'm working in something that I would do it even if I was doing it for free, is a huge blessing. So I don't take that lightly. We all got to pay bills. You know, the single mom who's out there with kids and just having to work multiple jobs to feed her family is way braver than any man or me that I know. So I don't want to diminish that. But
Hmm.
especially in the artist space or creative space, being able to ask yourself, like, if I don't get all the external markers of success, do I still love it enough to be pursuing it?
That's
Yeah.
such a great way to boil that down, and I think that's really illuminating. So thank you for that insight.
Yeah. Well, we do have one last question for you, Mary,
Yeah.
our signature question that we will be asking all of our guests. And before I ask it, I do just want to say how grateful we are for you, your time, your perspective. I think I feel so blessed by this conversation, and I'm
Me
excited
too, man.
for, yeah, just the fruitfulness of what it will represent for so many. But we've talked a
I appreciate
lot
you
about
having me.
like, yeah, oh my gosh, anytime,
I
seriously.
love it.
But we've talked a lot about, your general philosophy. We did touch on a bit more of your personal perspective in the beginning and in the context of your marriage. But really, to kind of wrap us up, we would love to hear, what does wellness look like for you in your life today?
For me, I actually, you guys mentioned that question to me before, and that one's a pretty easy one for me in this season. And what I think I've learned in the past year that I need is just to not say yes to too much, to not overload my schedule. Because right now, again, I don't want to pursue career. Um, that takes away from my kids' experience. I love those little dudes
Yeah.
so much. So, being able to be present especially when dad can't be present for their sports games, and just mentally and emotionally available to them is really important to me. So, I've had to recognize that right now in this season is not a time where I'm like going out with buddies, a couple times a week. I love my girlfriends, and um, we're and luckily we're all kind of in that season, so we spend a lot of time chitty chatting on Marco Polo stuff. But being able to say no, I mean, my weekends are pretty filled with like kids sporting events, and
Yeah.
it's fun, but just not overloading because I'm not my best self. And I recognize I have chosen. Um, to work and to pursue something in the past few years. So, you can't say yes to everything all the time. You know,
Mm-mm.
I think I heard Madeline Albright, I think it was, say one time, women can do everything, but they might not can do everything all at the same time. And that was really helpful to me to hear in trying to balance all those things. I do, for me, feel like I'm a better mom when I have something that I'm working towards and that I'm passionate about. And I think my kids get to see me building something and working with people and studying and being interested in something outside of them. So I think that's a huge benefit. But at the end of the day, they just want their mom to be present. So in this past year, I feel like I've really tried to focus on that. And um, sometimes that's me being able to step away and rather than go grab coffee with one of my girlfriends, which again I love. Sometimes I just need to go out into the gym in our garage and work out, move my body so that
Yeah.
I feel better and that kind of stuff. So just being okay, saying no sometimes has been for this season as wellness for me.
It's
I
not
think,
easy to do.
No.
So
no, I was
we're
like,
grateful for your yes today.
Oh, well,
yes,
this is,
yeah.
yeah, I love it. So I appreciate y'all having me and letting me chat about the things I'm excited about too. So it is one of those things in thinking about that question about, would you do it if you could do it free? I'm like, oh, I'd definitely do this for for free.
Yeah.
You know, I don't currently, but I love it so much.
What's that? There's a Viktor Frankl quote that is like, where the world's greatest need and where I'm messing it
Right.
up, but it's like where your world's greatest need and your life's passion meet is like where vocation happens. And
Yeah.
I think you're so clearly in yours. And so I'm excited for how this conversation will serve our listeners and hopefully the music industry at large. So we're so
Yeah.
grateful.
Thank y'all for creating the space to talk about it. And I love the passion of not just focusing on the artist, but the whole industry together. You know, I think that's really, really important and it needs to be heard too.
Thank you so much.
Ah.
Well, and one last thing, for those listening, how can they keep following you? You know, how can they find you if this topic really resonated and they're like, oh my gosh, I would love to, pursue Mary as a potential provider. Just share a bit more about how they can stay in touch with you.
Totally. And I'm always open to people if they're like, I'm curious, but I'm not sure. That's great. Like we can have
Yeah.
let's chat on the phone for a couple minutes and I can talk to you about my approach and you can think about it. Like this is, I'm not a car salesman. This is low pressure. So, but my website, lucerahealth.co, so lucerahealth.co is up and running. There's a spot on there you can reach out and just learn more about all the kind of different things I do, different, whether it's diagnoses or different therapeutic approaches I take. But it's LUCERA health.co, and Lucera means light in a dark place. So I'm really proud of that
Love
name.
that.
And then there it has like my contact info, but my email is MRR, so Mary Reames Rinehart, MRR at lucerahealth.co, or you can call or text 615-535-4243. Yeah, so that's all. I'd love to chat, even if somebody's just like curious. But my social media will eventually be up and running, but I'm one of those old people. I'm like, oh crap, I have to do social media stuff. My website for
No
right
rush.
now is old school and the best way to get in contact.
Yeah.
I love it.
And we'll
We'll
drop
include
that.
all that info
Yeah.
Yeah,
in the show notes so
For sure.
everybody can have access to it if they
yeah.
want to.
My social media will be up and running in like 2 weeks, but I have to like outsource that part. I need some Gen Zers to come help me with that.
I get it, girl.
God
I'm
bless.
28 and I feel very behind. So I get it.
I love it. Well,
Oh,
thank you again for
thank
joining
y'all
us for
so
this
much.
conversation.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for everyone who has tuned in. And if you have any questions for us, just drop them in the comments. However you're listening, YouTube, DSPs, you can reach out to us via email, through our website. We look forward to hearing from you. So thanks, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys next time.